Yet another very lovely evening out there to all of you, my dearest friends. We left off in chapter 3 talking about the peace offering. Now we come upon the sin offerings. Joseph Benson commented before we get started, the next kind of sacrifices appointed were for the expiation of particular sins, and are therefore called sin offerings. The first sort of these were for sins of ignorance. Now, a clear distinction must be made between what we have already went over, that of the burnt offering, the peace offering, and the meat or grain offering. We've already went over all of those. Those are voluntary offerings. But the sin offering and the trespass offering are the obligatory offerings. Now, immediately the question arises, did they have to bring an offering for every time that they sinned? I like Pool's comment on this. This must necessarily be understood of more than common sins and daily infirmities. For if every such sin had required an offering, it had not been possible either for most sinners to bear such a charge, or for the altar to receive so many sacrifices, or for the priest to manage so infinite a work. Therefore, for ordinary sins, they were ceremonially expiated by the daily offering, and by that on the great day of atonement. The moral lesson taught to the Jew by the sin offering was of the terrible nature of sin and of the necessity for an expiation for it in addition to penitence. Mystically, he might see that, as the blood of bulls and goats could not of its own virtue take away sin, there must be an offering foreshadowed by the sacrifice of the animals, which should be effectual as these were symbolic. The type is, of course, fulfilled by the atonement wrought by Christ's blood on the cross. And I've said this over and over again about the thing that they did the most ceremonially involved the shedding of blood on behalf of them, or as just an offering unto the Lord, be it voluntary or obligatory. The most that they did physically was sacrifice, shedding blood, and the most that they heard in their prophecies was of this Messiah to come. Therefore, how could they not associate the two together, the Messiah and sacrifice, all fulfilled in Christ Jesus? Verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speaking to the children of Israel, saying, if a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them. Now, once again, I want for all of you to observe this. If a soul shall sin through ignorance, meaning he did it inadvertently, and at the time of its committal did not know that it was a transgression, but recognized it as a sin after he did it. An example of this could be that he was in the vicinity of a dead body and was slightly unaware of it. He wasn't aware that he was committing a sin at that time, things like that. Verse 3, if the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, so we're talking about the priest here, then let him bring for his sin, which he hath sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. To me, this verse is perfect proof that there are no perfect men outside of Christ, no matter preacher, pastor, Sunday school. Even the high priest had to bring an offering for his sins, even from ancient times. And once again, we have here a young bullock without blemish, all of it pointing symbolically to Christ ultimately and his sacrifice, without blemish. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, and shall lay his hand upon the bullock's head, and kill the bullock before the Lord. And the priest that is anointed shall take of the bullock's blood, and bring it to the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle of the blood 7 times before the Lord, before the veil of the sanctuary. Now he's in the holy place, right outside of the Holy of Holies. Seven, being a complete number, is used for the perfect finishing of a work. Hence the 7 days of creation. 7 branches were in the golden candlestick. 7 times the blood was sprinkled on the Day of Atonement. 7 times was the oil sprinkled upon the altar when it was consecrated. But notice the very obvious distinction here. This is the first time of all the other sacrifices that it is so close, that this blood is to be sprinkled so close to the Holy of Holies, the most holy place in the universe. And that shows the great significance in it. Verse 7. And the priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour all the blood of the bullock at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Now this altar of burnt incense was also located right outside of the Holy of Holies. And it represents the prayers. And some blood was to be placed upon the horns of this altar. The rite shows, according to John Gill, the rite shows that the intercession of Christ, the prayers from him, signified by the altar of sweet incense, proceeds immediately following his blood and sacrifice. Just as we read in the New Testament in the book of Hebrews 7, wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. For such a high priest became us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens, who needeth not daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins and then for the people's. He didn't need to do that. For this he did once, when he offered up himself, completely sinless on behalf of the people. The ultimate sacrifice was Christ. We're then told how he brings the rest of the blood out to the altar of burnt offering, and pours it at the bottom of the altar. And this is very much believed to be symbolic of how the blood is the foundation of our faith. And the blood goes into the earth, notice, just as Christ's blood went into the earth on our behalf. Verse 8, and he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock for the sin offering, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall he take away. Once again, the fat is considered the best part of the sacrifice, because fat provides energy, and I believe that it also shows the blessings from God, that of how he keeps us fed, kept these animals fed. So it shows both energy, blessings. Also the 2 kidneys, which the kidneys are for separating the good from the bad in the body. So there's probably definite symbolism right there, and that is also to be offered up with this fat. As it was taken off from the bullock of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall burn them upon the altar of the burnt offering. And the skin of the bullock, and all his flesh, with his head, and with his legs, and his inwards, and his dung, even the whole bullock shall he carry forth outside the camp unto a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn him on the wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, shall he be burnt. ELLICOTT commented, unlike other burnt offerings, the skins of which were taken off and became the perquisite of the priest could use the hide for whatever they like. This sin offering was not flayed at all, but was cut to pieces with its skin. And as we have already went over, this sacrifice is cut to pieces, and it's believed that that's symbolically pointing towards how every part of Christ's body was in agony. Every part was affected by his sacrifice. And also how he was to carry his cross and be sacrificed outside the gate, outside the camp, if you will, outside of the walls of Jerusalem, away from the people, the same as this sin offering. And if the whole congregation of Israel sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which should not be done, and are guilty, when the sin which they have sinned against it is known, then the congregation shall offer a young bullock for the sin, and bring him before the tabernacle of the congregation, And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands upon the head of the bullock before the Lord, and the bullock shall be killed before the Lord. And the priest that is anointed shall bring of the bullock's blood to the tabernacle of the congregation, and the priest shall dip his finger in some of the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, even before the veil. And he shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar, which is before the Lord, that is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour out all the blood at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take all his fat from him, and burn it upon the altar. And he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for a sin offering, so shall he do with this. And the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Now we're told in the scripture about how the blood of bulls and rams do not of themselves atone for anyone's sins. No one is forgiven by these sacrifices, but because they pointed to the ultimate sacrifice that would be given, the lamb slain from the foundation of the world, as it was so certain that Christ's sacrifice would occur, then even before he was born, their sins would be covered just because of that enormous future event. And he shall carry forth the bullock without the camp, outside the camp, and burn him as he burned the first bullock. It is a sin offering for the congregation. When a ruler hath sinned, and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord his God concerning things which should not be done, and is guilty, or if his sin wherein he hath sinned come to his knowledge, if he suddenly realizes, oh, I was around a dead body or something, he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a young goat, a male without blemish. Now notice how this is different from that of the high priest and all the people. Jamieson Fawcett Brown noted this: the trespass of such a civil functionary being less serious, in relatively at least, in its character and consequences than that either of the high priest or the whole congregation, a sin offering of inferior value was required, a kid of the goats. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the goat, and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, not within the tabernacle. This was to be upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, outside. And shall pour out the rest of the blood at the bottom of the altar of burnt offering, like the other two. It was appropriate to place the blood on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, as those displayed the power, which horns often symbolized in the Old Testament, power, as those displayed the power of the earth, to which a ruler or a prince would be considered part of such rulers. But also, Christ ruling over the earth is to come, so that even points symbolically, we believe, to Christ. But the one thing that did not change was this blood at the bottom of the very same altar, the altar of burnt offering, as the other two sin offerings that were given. And it's foundational. And he shall burn all his fat upon the altar, as the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall make an atonement for him as concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. And if any one of the common people sin through ignorance, just one common person, not the congregation, but one common person, while he doeth somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and be guilty, or if his sin which he hath sinned come to his knowledge, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he hath sinned. So take note also of how this is slightly more inferior to all the rest. It's just a common person. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. And I believe there's also symbolism in that, how the offerer had to slay the animal. And I believe that shows how Christ had to die on our behalf, and how, as they often say, it wasn't the nails that held him upon the cross. It was us. It was what we have done. And the priest shall take of the blood thereof with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat is taken away from off the sacrifice of peace offerings, and the priest shall burn it upon the altar for a sweet savour unto the Lord. And the priest shall make an atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. And if he bring a lamb for a sin offering, he shall bring it a female without blemish. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay it for a sin offering in the place where they kill the burnt offering. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat of the lamb is taken away from the sacrifice of the peace offerings, and the priest shall burn them upon the altar, according to the offering made by the fire unto the Lord. And the priest shall make an atonement for his sin that he hath committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Now let's give just quick commentary, and that is the end of the chapter of Leviticus 4. So now you know the sin offerings that had to be given for the high priest, for the whole congregation, all the people, for the rulers, and for the layman, whoever it may be. ELLICOTT commented on these last two. The flesh of the sin offering, both for the priest and for the individual members of the community, was not burnt outside the camp, as was the case with the flesh of the sacrifice for the high priest and for the whole congregation, but was the perquisite of the priest and was eaten by them, as we'll learn in chapter 6. This is in harmony with the law. The sinner who brought the sin offering could not partake of it. If you were the one bringing the sin offering, you were not allowed to partake. It's better to fast than to feast at that time. Hence, the priest was not permitted to eat of the flesh of the sin offering which he offered for himself, or of the flesh of the congregational sin offering, because he was a member of the congregation.